What are the different link states and why are they important? You may have seen a link on a web page become purple after you click it. This is because the state of the link has changed, so different styling gets applied. There are 5 different states a link can be in. The first is the default state, which is link. This link represents a link which the user has not visited, clicked, or interacted with yet. You can think of this state as providing the base styles for all links on your page. The other states build on top of it. The second state is visited, which applies when a user has already visited the page being linked to. By default, this turns the link purple, but you can leverage CSS to provide a different visual indicator to the user. This is helpful to let someone know they have already read a portion of your documentation, or that the site is one they can trust because they have used it before. The third state is hover. This state applies when a user is hovering their cursor over a link. This state is helpful, providing extra attention to a link to ensure a user actually intends to click it. Then we have focus. This state applies for when we focus on a link. And finally, we have active. This state applies to link. It applies for when we focus on a link. And finally, we have active. Then we have focus. This state applies for when we focus on a link. And finally, we have active. This state applies to links that are being activated by the user. This typically means clicking on the link with the primary mouse button by left-clicking in most cases. This state can be helpful for showing a user that the element they clicked on is interactive. When you use these states to style your links, there are specific orders you need to write your CSS in. So for example, you could do link visited, hover, then acted, or LVHA. You should now know how to give links in your page your own personal that the site is one they can trust because they have used it before. The third state is hover. This state applies when a user is hovering their cursor over a link. This state is helpful, providing extra attention to a link to ensure a user actually intends to click it. Then we have focus. This state applies for when we focus on a link. And finally, we have active. This state applies to links that are being activated by the user. This typically means clicking on the link with the primary mouse button by left-clicking in most cases. This state can be helpful for showing a user that the element they clicked on is interactive. When you use these states to style your links, there are specific orders you need to write your CSS in. So for example, you could do link visited, hover, then acted, or LVHA. You should now know how to give links in your page your own personal link visited, hover, then acted, or you need to write your CSS in. So for example, interactive. When you use these states to style your links, there are specific orders you need to write your CSS in. So for example, you could do link visited, hover, then acted, or LVHA. When you use these states to style your links, there are specific orders you need to write your CSS in. So for example, you could do link visited hover
Why should you care about semantic HTML? Semantics are the meaning of words or phrases in a language. In HTML, which is a language, elements have their own semantic meaning too. In fact, you can think of your HTML document like you would a text document. And much like a text document, you might have headings, images, bold text, and other formatting. The semantic meaning of an element refers to what special information that element conveys. The semantic meaning of a P element, for example, is a paragraph of text. Most elements have semantic meaning. The div element is one of the very few that does not. But why is this important? First and foremost, using proper semantic HTML will ensure the best experience for users with assistive technology like screen readers. But also, semantic HTML can improve your search rankings. This is referred to as search engine optimization, or SEO. Finally, using correct semantic elements can improve your development experience. Rather than having to sift through a bunch of div elements to find your navigation bar, you can edit the nav element directly and know what you are changing. Throughout this section, you will learn more about these topics, how to use semantic elements, and why semantic HTML is so important. Why is it important to have good structural hierarchy? The most important aspect of creating a structural hierarchy is the proper use of heading elements. Heading elements are numbered as H1, H2, H3, and so on. These numbers represent the heading level for that element. Much like a text document, you do not want to use heading levels in the incorrect order. Your H1 element is your top level heading. You will rarely have more than one of these on a page, and it should typically come before all of your content. Your H2 element is your subheading. It should always come after your H1 and might come after some introductory text. Unlike an H1 element, you can have multiple H2 elements on your page. You'll often do this to delineate different sections of content. Following the pattern, your H3 element should always come after an H2 element. That is, you should never skip directly from H1 to H3. You can, however, have multiple heading elements at the same level. For example, this code is correct. But this code would not be correct because H3 comes before H2. It may be tempting to use a specific heading element because of its styling, such as H1 for large text. Instead, you should choose the appropriate element for your document structure and use CSS to achieve the styling you'd like. Using the right hierarchy is important for accessibility. Assistive technologies like screen readers rely on the structure of a web page to determine how to parse and announce that web page to the user. Using an H3 element after an H1 might cause a screen reader user to believe they have accidentally skipped over important content due to the lack of an H2 element. Proper structure is also important for SEO. Search engines use automation to parse the content of your web page and determine when and where it should show up in results. If your structure is malformed, search engines may not be able to rank you very well in the relevant search results. Finally, depending on how incorrect your structure is, your HTML may not even be technically valid. When this happens, the web browser has to effectively guess what you meant to do, and what it guesses might not even be what you want at all. As you have learned today, there are many reasons to use the proper structural hierarchy for your page. Keep this in mind as you build new projects. What's the difference between presentational and semantic HTML? Presentational HTML focuses on the appearance and style of the content. In the early days of HTML, developers would use elements like the center, big, and font elements. But in modern web development, you shouldn't use these types of elements because of their limitations and negative impact on accessibility and maintainability. Many presentational HTML elements are deprecated, which means that they are outdated and no longer recommended. There are better ways to get the same result. However, it is helpful to know that they exist, so we'll take a look at some examples. The font element is a deprecated element used to set the font size and color of the text. Here's an example of a font element. This example sets the color of the text to blue and the size to a value of 5. The range for the size attribute is from 1 to 7, with 1 being the smallest and 7 being the largest. The default value is 3 if you don't set the value explicitly. This is what you will see in the browser. While this element still works, you should not use it because the font size and color should always be set in CSS, not in HTML. The center element is another deprecated element that is used to center the content horizontally within its container. Here's an example of the center element that contains text and a paragraph element. This is what you would see in the browser for this example. All of the content within the center element is centered horizontally. And next, we have the big element. This is another deprecated presentational HTML element that makes the enclosed text one level bigger than its surrounding text. Here we have an example that defines a paragraph with 2 parts. The first part has normal-sized text, while the second part, enclosed within the big element, will be displayed in a larger font size. This is what you would see in the browser. The text within the big element looks larger compared to the surrounding text. However, remember that font size should always be set with CSS. So you should not use this element in modern HTML. These were examples of presentational HTML elements, but all of them are deprecated and no longer recommended. So what should you use instead? Let's see. Semantic HTML is now the recommended practice. It describes the content of the elements, so it's much easier to read, understand, and maintain. Search engines can easily understand your website when you use semantic HTML. It's also helpful for accessibility purposes because screen readers need semantic information to describe what's on the web page. Examples of semantic HTML elements include the header element for defining the header of the document or section, the navigation section element, nav, for sections with navigation links, the section element for grouping related information, the figure element for illustrations and diagrams. This is an example of a header element that contains a navigation section element. The semantic elements clearly show their purpose within the HTML structure. There are many different semantic HTML elements. You will definitely find one that fits the needs of your project. Great work. Now you know the difference between presentation When should you use the emphasis element over the idiomatic text element? These elements are very closely related to the concepts of presentational and semantic HTML. The idiomatic text element is originally used for presentational purposes to display the text in italics. But now it is frequently used for highlighting alternative voice or mood, idiomatic terms from another language, technical terms, and thoughts. Here is an example from the official HTML spec using the I element to show an idiomatic phrase in French. The lang attribute inside the open I tag is used to specify the language of the content. In this case, the language would be French. Here's what the example looks like displayed in the browser. The I element does not indicate if the text is important or not. It only shows that it's somehow different from the surrounding text. If you do need to emphasize the importance of the text, you can use a similar semantic element called the emphasis element, M. This is usually recommended if you need to provide more context. You should use this element for parts of the text that require a special emphasis compared to surrounding text. It's usually limited to only a few words because it can alter the meaning of the sentence. This is an example of the emphasis element within a paragraph. You can see the sentence, "Never give up on your dreams." Notice that the word your will be emphasized because it's inside this element. This is what you will see in the browser, exactly what you anticipated. The word your is italicized to tell readers that this is an important word in the sentence. Even if it looks the same when the text was inside the idiomatic text element, the semantic emphasis element When should you use the strong element over the bring attention to element? The bring attention to element B is commonly used to highlight keywords in summaries or product names in reviews. Usually browsers display this text in boldface. Here's an example using the B element to highlight product names in this review. You can see attention to the product names. If you need strong is a semantic HTML element that emphasizes text instead of the B bold text. This visual emphasis will draw readers' attention to the product names. If you need to emphasize the importance of the text, you should use the strong element instead of C. Visually, both are very similar because they are both rendered as bold by default, but their meanings are quite different. While the bring attention to element only draws attention to the text without indicating the higher level of importance, the strong element does more than that. It conveys a sense of importance or urgency. This is their main difference. To choose between them, consider the purpose of the text and its importance within the surrounding context. What are description lists and when should you use them? Description lists are perfect for presenting terms and definitions in an organized and easy to read format, like in a glossary or real dictionary, where you can find words with their corresponding definitions. This is an example of a description list in HTML with two terms and their corresponding details. In this case, the terms are the acronyms HTML and CSS, and the details are their expansions. The details could also be definitions or other information related to the terms. You will need three HTML elements, definitions, and the details are their expansions. The terms are the acronyms HTML and CSS, and the details are their expansions. The details could also be definitions or other information related to the terms. You will need three HTML elements to define a description list. First, the description list element, DL, which is the container for the entire list. You can see it here around all the other elements of the description list. Then one description term element, DT, for each term. In this case, the description list has two terms, HTML and CSS, so it has two of these elements. And finally, after each term, you will find a description details element, DD, for the description or details associated with that term. In this example, they are hypertext markup language followed by its corresponding description. By default, the descriptions are slightly more indented towards the right to distinguish them visually. But description lists are not limited to only terms and definitions. They are much more versatile than that. Here we have a recipe with two ingredients. The entire description list is within a description list element. The first ingredient, flour, is within a description term element. Then you can see how much of this ingredient you will need, 2 cups. This is within a description details element directly after its corresponding ingredient. And the same structure is repeated for sugar. In this case, the recipe has only 2 ingredients. But if there were more, the same structure could be repeated throughout the description list. This is what you will see in the browser. The ingredients are aligned to the left, while the measurements are indented to separate them visually. Other use cases for description lists include product specifications, when you list information in a key value pair, metadata. Essentially, frequently asked questions, contact information for description lists include products are indented to separate them visually. Other use cases for description lists include product specifications, frequently asked questions, contact information, and metadata. Essentially, when you have 2 related pieces of information in a key value pair format, where one acts as a label, the key, and the other acts as additional related information, the value, you can use a description list.
Sorry guys, I got little late. Uh, like I was in bathroom. You know, you know what I mean, right? Okay, okay. Hmm. We still have to study till for 1 more hour so that we can have around 5 hours. Okay, let me see if what try to what. Wait a second. How is this possible? No. Yeah. Why? Hmm. Why can't we record what we play? Yes. That was little suspicious because why wouldn't a company why would a company not allow us to record? You know, I think this is not grammatically correct. It would be like why would a company stop? Why would a company stop? Will आएगा या नहीं है? Will नहीं आएगा ना? Will के साथ would नहीं आएगा. Why will a company? Why would a company stop me from recording?
How do block and inline quotes work in HTML? In HTML, quoted elements are used to distinguish quoted text from the surrounding content. This gives the quoted text a format that is easy to identify. You should use the block quotation element for representing a section quoted from another source. It's mainly used for extended quotations. If the source of the quote has an address, you can cite it with the cite attribute. The value of this attribute should be a valid URL. This is an example of a quote within a block quotation element. This element has a cite attribute.
Guys, I'll come back after some time. Okay.